paying close attention to that interview. Joining me now for more is Mo Kelly, host of KFI Radio's Later with Mo Kelly, expert on all things politics and current affairs, also a contributor to Inside the Issues, also someone who knows a thing or two about interviews. Hey, Mo, how you doing?
Good to talk to you, my friend.
And you, as always, and let's talk about this interview and the importance of interviews. I mean, the Trump campaign has made this big deal about the fact that Kamala Harris has not yet sat for a proper interview since becoming the Democratic presidential nominee. What's the sense that you get of how much people actually care about that, the quote-unquote obligation for nominees to sit for these interviews? What's the upshot of all of it?
Well, the goals of media and the goals of a campaign or candidate are not the same. So let's put it in its proper context. Yes, the media will want a sit-down interview because they want the exclusive. Yes, the opposition would demand that the opposition sit down for an interview because they always want to poke and prod and see what the pressure point of the opposition is. But as far as the reality goes, this has never been a thing. People have never demanded an interview before. We had former President Trump, when he was a candidate, doing phoner interviews in 2016, and that was unheard of. The goal is to reach voters where they are. And the Harris-Walz campaign, they've spent more money than anyone else when it comes to the digital platform, trying to reach young voters and older voters right where they are.
In this time that it's taken for Kamala Harris to sit for this interview, obviously the Trump campaign's been leaning into it. And in part, they're pointing to this particular interview that Kamala Harris did as vice president with Lester Holt, talking about the border, immigration. He asked if she'd been to the border. She said, I've been to Europe. And it became this moment where something stuck to her about the way she was, as Republicans say, handling the situation inadequately. Do you think that she did herself a disservice by not sitting for this interview as yet, or do you feel like just sitting for this one with CNN, with Dana Bash, will eliminate all of that criticism?
I can predict that after she sits or they sit for this interview, the demand will be another interview. Sitting with CNN today, then ABC will demand or NBC will demand. There will be some other hoop to jump through. But there is real danger here, if only because what is said here will be used against her and them in the next presidential debate, if it actually happens on September 10th. That's the whole point of having your opposition sit down, because then they have to literally and figuratively sit down on their answers, and they're kind of locked in prior to the next event, which will be that debate. There is something to be concerned about. But let's be honest, without this interview, the polling has been up for Harris. The donations have been up. The viewership during the DNC was up. There was no reason in the world for them to short circuit their own momentum by scheduling this interview prematurely.
You said if she sits, and then you said when they sit, because, of course, you're alluding to the fact that it's going to be not just Kamala Harris, but also Kamala Harris and her vice presidential running mate, Tim Walz. And this is yet another angle upon which Republicans are criticizing, saying Wall Street Journal editorial board said this was Kamala Harris's crutch to have Walz sitting there, because he'll parachute in and he'll help deflect and he'll make it so that it's not necessarily such an indictment for Harris and she can't impugn herself in some way. What do you make of these criticisms of the structure and the format and the fact that it's with CNN and Dana Bash as opposed to some other network that I suppose the Trump campaign would have preferred?
Well, here I would say the Trump campaign is not wrong. Yes, when you have someone, a literal wingman sitting at your side, yes, there's someone to help you clean up your answers and all those things. But we're talking about campaigning. We're talking about winning elected office. You shouldn't worry about what the opposition says. You should do what is going to be best for you and your campaign. And you just have to block out the criticisms, because if the interview goes well, even though there are a lot of pitfalls and possible problems that could happen, if you do well, it can only be more momentum for your campaign. Don't worry about what anyone else has to say.
Let's click in a little more locally, Mo. We'd like to jump around with you, and let's bring it to what we're seeing in Southern California politics in Orange County. Orange County Supervisor Andrew Doe calls for him to resign following this federal probe. There were some raids on some homes in connection with, there's a couple things happening here, but one of them is Andrew Doe's daughter in connection with this charity. There's these funds that come to this charity. She is able to use these funds in some way to acquire these multi-million-dollar homes. And this has become a big to-do. What's your sense of what's happening there and the politics of it?
It is a big to-do because we're talking about more than $10 million, and we're talking about ethics. And ethics demands two things. One, the avoidance of actual impropriety, and two, the avoidance of the appearance of impropriety. And if there's more than $10 million moving hands, mostly at the behest of you, and it's going to a nonprofit that you did not disclose was controlled, at least in part, by a family member that directly ties you to that charity, then you are engaging in at least the appearance of impropriety. Now, the investigation will determine whether it was actual impropriety, but you can't deny that you are abusing the public trust if you're leaving out that very significant and serious information given the transfers of more than $10 million.
Let's now click out a little more statewide and also when it comes to an issue that you and I talk about a lot, and it's homelessness in Southern California. Long Beach has moved ahead with some encampments. There's one in Gumbiner Park and some others. It's this conversation. Rex Richardson has said, look, we have tools now thanks to the Supreme Court overturning Grants Pass, this Ninth Circuit case, and Governor Gavin Newsom also urging local municipalities to clear encampments. Essentially now homelessness can be criminalized according to the Supreme Court with this ruling, and Long Beach is moving on it. You're talking about this on the show tonight for you as well. How are people thinking and talking about this change in the policy there for homelessness in Long Beach and elsewhere?
Well, hopefully they're talking about the people, not just the policy and the politics of it, because fewer encampments doesn't mean fewer homeless people. If you're pushing people out of parks in Long Beach and they go to Signal Hill, are you really eradicating homelessness, or are you just moving it from your view? And I think that far too often we're concerned with not seeing homelessness, not seeing people sleeping on the streets, but not getting to the root cause and dealing with the issues as to why they even ended up on the streets. Or if you move them out of the parks and you move them off the streets, what's preventing them from coming back 2 or 3 weeks later? We got to get to the heart of the actual issue. And I know the politics says it's good that they're doing something, but the something may not be the right thing.
Lots of conversation about people moving from municipality to municipality on the back of the Supreme Court case. We'll continue to talk about that. Well, before I let you go, we just got a quick second, but Dodger Stadium is a place to be. People have been lining up since 11 a.m. for that Shohei Ohtani bobblehead of Shohei with his dog decoy. What's your sense of this mania around a guy who's having an incredible season?
Dodgers are not anyone new to mania. If you go back to Fernando Valenzuela and Fernando mania, it feels very similar, except in this age of the online marketplace, you can get a Shohei Ohtani bobblehead. It's an instant collector's item, and they're only going to get about 40,000 of them, even though there are more than 54,000 people who will be in the house, and there might be some gold ones in there as well. I can't wait to see what they're going to go for online.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big questions coming out of this. We're taking a look at some of those people who've lined up from so early. My gosh, that guy might be a 50-50 guy, by the way. It's incredible. 50-50 club. We haven't seen it. Mo Kelly, you break it down so well, as always, brother. Thank you so much for being with us Inside the Issues. Have a great show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mo Kelly, KFI radio host. You can hear him on KFI on the nightly. And we got more coming up on Inside the Issues. Don't go anywhere.